Good morning, it's Cameron Monroe here from Tiergarten Fear Association. I am very pleased to welcome Chris Webb, one of our members from the UK, who is visiting Berlin and visiting our offices and library and archive. So I wanted to interview Chris today because he has, I have just discovered, been researching the Action Reinhardt camps for 50 years. A lifetime. So we think it would be very interesting to talk to Chris about how he got into the research and what he's done over those 50 years and what he is currently doing. So welcome, Chris.
Good morning, Cameron, and thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem. So, Chris, let's get right to it. So let's begin with, how did you get interested in this topic? When?
I've been studying the Holocaust since 1971, when my late father gave me a book on the final solution by Gerald Reitlinger. So I've been studying it on and off since then, like everyone else. I've raised a family. I worked for Royal Mail for 39 years, so I wasn't always doing it. But certainly since 2000, I've been intensely researching the Holocaust, and Action Reinhardt in particular.
So how did you come to focus on Action Reinhardt?
Because of that book, I was fascinated that it was underdocumented. Mm-hmm. All the research seemed to be about Auschwitz, very little on Treblinka, very little on Belzec, very little on Sobibor. And that gripped my interest, and that started me researching that specific part of the Holocaust. But I've got an overall interest in the Holocaust, including Auschwitz and Helmno and places like that. But my main focus has been on Action Reinhardt.
So maybe you can just tell us how or why do you have so much interest in the Holocaust?
I don't know really. I suppose I was always interested in history at school. So I always liked history. But I think it was the fact that these camps were under-researched. Yeah. And I think that brought out the historian and the researcher in me. Mm-hmm. I first visited Poland in 2000, and I visited Belzec and Majdanek in the company of the English historian Michael Tregenza, mm-hmm. who played a very big part in my development of historical research, and he was very generous in the files that he gave me and some of the papers that he gave me.
Can I ask one point there? So was your feeling that, and we're talking about the early days, if I want to call it that, so the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, pretty much the only people who were researching Action Reinhardt camps, for example, were those, what you might call amateur historians. They weren't professors at universities or working in some memorial. These were people who had an interest in the topic and therefore researched it because they felt it was under-researched and nobody was taking responsibility for that.
Yes, I think so. And I think Tregenza, in that respect, he was an amateur researcher, very much almost on his own. Mm-hmm. And I think that he was certainly a pioneer in that field. And somebody like Robin O'Neill as well, mm-hmm. who I know, they were very much at the cutting edge. There were some professional historians like Peter Witter that showed an interest in Action Reinhardt, but generally speaking, you're right, they were mainly amateur researchers.
And when did you start, I mean, obviously you started off on your own with your interest. When did you start to come into contact with other like-minded historians?
I suppose the main driver and the main factor in that was that I made contact with a chap called Michael in Germany, who built a model of Treblinka, and with help from Richard Gazar, survivor, and we built up a friendship. We ended up going to Poland in 2002, and that was my first visit to Treblinka, Sobibor, my second visit to Belzec. From that trip, we started the ARC website.
Maybe you should talk a bit about the ARC website.
And I will talk about that. ARC was the name given by me, and deathcamps.org was the name also given by me. We formed that with mainly a small group of model makers. I was the outsider, if you like. I was not a model maker. I was a historian, and we built up what was, for 3 years, one of the most visited and well-respected websites on Action Reinhard. It's called Action Reinhard Camps, using an awful lot of the photographs that I'd built up over the years. And we started, and documents, and also I was lucky enough that I made contact with 2 Treblinka survivors, Carmen Tejman and Eliahu Rosenberg. And Tejman in particular, I built up I never met him, but I built up a huge correspondence library, if you like, of my letters with him for over 10 years, until he died, sadly. And the ARC website was important because I actually think that was the first website that actually catered for Action Reinhard. And as you know, we did a second trip to Poland, where I was lucky enough to meet you for the first time in 2004. And we went to just about everywhere that we could. And that strengthened, if you like, what we were able to do with the website, what we were able to produce. Now, sadly, that website ceased in 2005 for the first time.
Why was that, Chris?
Michael got disillusioned, I think, and it was restored, but it was never the same again. Feelings were not the same, and it limped on for another year, and then finally bit the dust in 2006.
But it still exists, right?
It still exists. I own the copyright of that. I still maintain it.
Yes.
But it's not been added to for a long time.
So if I can ask, obviously that was a sad day when it was no longer an active website, although it still exists in its form that it was in those days. So what effect did that have on you in terms of what you moved to next, in terms of your research and what you were doing?
Well, straight away, with a former ARC member, a guy called Carmelo, who was an IT expert in America, we founded the HEART website. And the Holocaust Historical Society was also founded in 2006. The HEART website was actually a very stark website in comparison to ARC, which actually got a bit spoilt in a way because it developed in the webmaster designed it with various colours. On occasions it looked like an explosion in a paint factory, which was my favourite saying. And the HEART website, which stood for Holocaust Education and Research Team, was very much a stark black and white website. So there were no colours in it, very, very few colours in it. And the HEART website, in my opinion, just built on ARC, and that ran from 2006 to 2014. So it lasted 8 years.
And why Why did it stop?
I think Carmelo just lost interest in it.
I understand.
And to be fair to him, you know, he was an amateur Holocaust historian, but he was more interested in the IT side of things,
I understand.
whereas I'm very much the historian and the researcher.
So, in 2014, at the point the ARC website, the HART website ceased in terms of new material. What was the turn of events in terms of where you were to go from there?
Well, that HART website is also still online, still visible.
But you don't add to.
But it's not added to. So I then started to realise that actually it was something that I could do myself. So I started the Holocaust Historical website. Took me 2 years to get it off the ground, but that started in 2016. It's currently got over 400 articles on it. It is a huge website, and it covers everything from ghettos to the perpetrators to rolls of remembrance to Einsatzgruppen to the camps, to the concentration camps, and the death camps themselves, Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka, which still retain my main focus. But, as I say, it's a very comprehensive website.
So are you the only contributor to that, or are there
No, some other people do contribute, but I am the main contributor. And I use photographs from my own private archive to enrich the pages, which I'm very proud of. And through my website, I get contacted by people like the BBC, and I've contributed to programmes like Who Do You Think You Are? I contributed some photographs for Robert Rinder and for Jerry Springer. And I've also contributed to the French documentary Annihilation, which I also contributed to put pictures for that. And through my website, obviously, my name is, became known. I've also done a couple of podcasts for the Ghetto Fighters House in Israel. One on Belzec, which I'm pleased to say, so I'm told, garnered the most questions they've ever been asked for a podcast. And I also did one on Action Reinhardt.
If I remember correctly as well, you were also involved in the famous BBC documentary series on Auschwitz.
I was.
You contributed to that.
I was a contributor to that.
I remember,
I'm named on that, which I'm pleased to say.
Yeah.
And got well paid as well, for once.
So, 2016 was a turning point for you in terms of the old HART website had stopped in terms of additional material. You had this new website. When did you start thinking about moving from more, what we might call more digital type material in terms of disclosing to the general public what all your research, etc., to writing books?
Well, I actually started writing books in 2012 after I finished my employment with Royal Mail, and I'd been employed by Royal Mail for 39 and a half years, so that's a long time. So I started writing my first book on Treblinka in 2012. Thanks to being encouraged, if that is the right word, by my great friend, and I must mention him, Professor Matthew Feldman, who said that with my knowledge I should write a book. I never thought I would, but I started then. My books he put me in touch with a German publisher called Ibidem Verlag, and my first book, co-written with a Czech historian Mikhail Chocolati on Treblinka. I wrote most of the book, but I included Michael because he'd carried out some interviews with Treblinka survivors. So he's got a whole section in the book of those interviews. But that's what started me writing. I never thought I would. That started me writing it, and that was published in 2014. That gave me the bug. I then have now published second editions on Treblinka, second editions on Belzec, second editions on Sobibor, and this book on Sobibor was published in January of this year. So that's hot off the press, so to speak. And I want to talk about this book in particular. This is the biggest book that I've written, over 700 pages. And what I wanted to do with this book was to include, in this edition, the post-war testimonies of the former SS men who served in Sobibor, which I was lucky enough to get from the NIOD in Amsterdam and got their permission to use it. It's all in German, I had to get that translated, but that was the focus of this second book on Sobibor. And what I want to talk about now is the value of research. I'm an old-fashioned researcher. I believe it's important to check and double-check facts. I've been on a personal quest for over 20 years to find some evidence of one of the SS Sonderkommando members, Rudolf Beckmann. And I was extremely grateful for Robert Partzer, who was also a member of T4, who alerted me to this book, which I bought, and it showed photos of Beckmann. And I'd been after a photo of Beckmann and proof of Beckmann for over 20 years without any joy. Now, as it turned out, they said in the book he came from Osnabrück, and a chap called Georg from Osnabrück got in touch with me about an ARC-related issue on Kurt Sickel, who was at the Sportsplatz in Lublin, who had actually been his family doctor after the war. And I got to talking to him about Beckmann from Osnabrück and told him this was my quest, so far very fruitless quest, for a number of years. And Georg started researching based on the information in Cooper's book, and we thought we'd found him. But it turns out we hadn't. Georg had a feeling that what we were researching wasn't quite right. So he continued to press the Bundesarchive, of which I have a lot of contact with in terms of my research here in Berlin. And he managed to find out that Beckmann in the Sobibor book, Photos from Sobibor, that information was incorrect. And that in actual fact, Rudolf Beckmann was actually born in a different birth date and was actually not born in Osnabrück at all, but was born in Böhr, Gelsenkirchen. So I was able to include that in my book, but I want to prove that there's no better thing to do than your own research and research with others, because you can't do everything by yourself, to actually not take for granted that everything you read is correct. So we were able to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt, because we now have Beckmann's personal file, that he was born in Böhr, he was buried in Helm, he was killed in the revolt. And I hope my message to all would be researchers and historians, do your own research, don't take everything for granted, and don't give up, because my search for Beckman might have lasted 20 years, but I got there in the end, and I think that's important. And I think I can't underestimate that enough.